So we're here to talk about stories of the Curtis Hotel. I'm going to give a slideshow presentation, tell you some of the history that we have at the library, and then at the end of that I'd like to invite stories from you of your own stories of the Curtis, because we have a wonderful local history collection here, but it probably ends about 1940 or so. So I'm hoping there's some with memories that can pick up the slack. So let's see. Let me close that out, and let's start. So there's been a tavern or hotel, some sort of establishment on this corner next door since 1773. The highway, the main highway to get here and beyond came from Hartford, through the Farmington River Valley and up through, came through Lee and then through Lenox, coming up from Lenox Furnace, which we now know as Lenoxdale, coming around this corner down Main, and then up over Cliffwood on its way to Albany. So that was the 10th County Turnpike, also known as the Hartford and Albany Turnpike. So this area here was kind of a central location and a perfect place for a gathering spot. The tavern became the Berkshire Coffee House in 1793. This is an artist's rendering of the original coffee house. This picture would have had to be a representation after 1815, because you're seeing the building that we're in now, which is the Lenox Library currently, but that was the second county courthouse. The first county courthouse was on where the current town hall stands, across from, would have been across from this Berkshire Coffee House.
Amy,
Yes.
I'm looking at the street to the left, how bare and empty it is. And is that the church on the hill?
That is a church on the hill, Ellen, up on the top. Now, this is an artist's rendition, so I think there would have, you can almost make out the little buildings on the side, but there weren't all that many houses. Main Street was actually built on a swamp, so it took a while, and that'll be another topic between the swamp and the iron ores, but we'll focus on this one for today. 1795 was the formation of the Eastern Star Masonic Lodge. The Masons first had a foothold in this area with General John Patterson of the Revolutionary War. He was the master of a traveling Masonic group, the Washington Division. Mainly in the Revolutionary War, they were trying to establish a brotherhood. In 1795, the Eastern Star Lodge was formed. The charter was signed by Paul Revere. You can see, I'm showing a picture of the Patterson Monument. You can see the original county courthouse on the corner. That's the building with the cupola. And I'm going to zoom in here. So here's the Patterson Monument. It's an obelisk. There are other Revolutionary War symbols that also a Mason may tell you have some Masonic significance. Patterson was a Mason. Eggleston, also on this monument, was a Mason. There's a fellow, I don't know if you can see him, with the bowler hat and the white beard, back to the camera looking up at the monument. That would be Edwin Hale Lincoln, a local photographer who took wonderful pictures of the cottages. This would have been at the unveiling of the monument in 1892. Now, the actual first master of the Eastern Star Lodge, which met at that Berkshire County house, was another Revolutionary War hero, Captain William Walker. He would have settled first at 1771 on a house down the Hartford-Albany Road, which would later be named after him, Walker Street. This house is not that house. This is one that was built in 1802, which stands on the current corner of Walker and Kemble, that is now known as the Walker House. And he was the first master of the Eastern Star Lodge that met at the Berkshire Coffee House. Now, even though the courts, which were established in 1787 with Lenox as the county seat, the courthouse that we just saw was built in 1792. But court business and political business was often held at the coffee house. Here is an auction notice to be sold at public verdure by order of the, I think that's General Court of Common Pleas for the County of Berkshire to the highest bidder. This is a notice for the auction of the late Rufus Parker. His estate, his house was on East Street. It is now currently the house where the Sluzniak family live at the bottom of the hill after Eastover. This auction was held at the Berkshire Coffee House. Daniel Williams was the owner of the coffee house, and in 1817 he decides to put the coffee house on the market. So this is Daniel Williams offers for sale his tavern in Lenox, well known by the name of the coffee house, pleasantly situated within 6 rods of the elegant new brick courthouse, our library. Permanently established in said town, the coffee house is large and convenient. The barn, stabling, and horse houses are as good and convenient as any in the county. The other outbuildings are good and convenient. The house lots contain 1.5 acres of land, on which is an excellent garden and small orchard. Said Williams has pasture and woodland conveniently situated, which he would sell with the house if the purchaser so choose. So that was in 1817. The coffee house would be rebuilt in 1829. Pex and Phelps would be the builders, and it would no longer look like the white building that we saw. It would look something like this.
Did it burn down or what?
That I'm not sure, Louise, and I'll show you why in a moment. This is the Berkshire Coffee House. This picture obviously is a little later than 1829 because we didn't have photography in 1829. But this would have been known as the Berkshire Coffee House, as the Red Inn, and later on as Wilson's Hotel. So what I've zoomed in on is the center of town from the map of Lenox from 1831. In 1830, the state of Massachusetts mandated that all towns submit a map to the State House, and this is Lenox's version. I'll tell you that the town of Lee has a much nicer one.
What's the Leaning Tower of Pisa next to the courthouse?
That is the coffee house. So you can see you have the townhouse, which is the old town hall that we saw in that picture with the Patterson Monument. I don't think these things are to scale because the Lenox Academy is quite a bit larger than any other structure in town, and that's, if you know Main Street, if you go down Main Street, the 1803, where the Lenox Historical Society is currently located. Wonderful folks, you should support them. And let's see, and across the street, not really, is the courthouse, again, our building here. And you can see just jutting to the side would have been the location of the coffee house. Here's another image. This is from 1839. You can see, again, the old town hall. You can see our Berkshire Coffee House, our new courthouse. I believe that's the jailer's house and jail next to it. Across the street from the coffee house is the old Patterson home, now the Adams Community Bank. Between the coffee house and the town hall, you can see some spires. That would have been the Episcopal Church on Church Street. Believe it or not, there was a reason why Church Street was named Church Street. There used to be two churches on it, the Episcopal Church and the Methodist. The last note on that description of this picture is that the spires of the Episcopal Church are seen between the townhouse and Wilson's Hotel. So now we're in the Major Wilson era of things. Here's another map. This one is drawn by hand by William Bartlett. He's drawing it from memory of his time in Lenox 50 years before this. So this is a map that he drew in 1892, remembering his memories of 1842. And you can see Wilson's Hotel, the Bishop House, which no longer stands, the courthouse, the jail keeper in jail on the corner of what is now Main Street and Housatonic. You have the town hall on this corner, and then you can see below the town hall where it says Old Coffee House. So to answer your question, Louise, I don't know, didn't get time to research whether they picked up the old coffee house building and moved it, because in Lenox they moved houses like we move cars. In fact, the town hall is now on Housatonic Street, the home of the Brava restaurant and at Aldiva. So picture that building with a cupola on it, where the new town hall, I've already been in this job too long, the new town hall that was built in 1902. Bartlett has a narrative that goes with this map. Actually, the map goes with the narrative. And in it, he describes Major Wilson, but he mentions nothing about the fact that he owned a hotel. He talks about what a wonderful tenor he was. He sang for the Congregational Church, and everyone remembered his thrilling tenor voice. But they didn't remember his hotel skills, which is why in 1850 he would start to think about time to sell the Wilson Hotel. Do we recognize these fellows? We have Herman Melville on the left and Nathaniel Hawthorne on the right. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne rented a house on Hawthorne Road. It's amazing how I wonder, one of these studies is going to be to determine what these streets were called before these folks came to have their streets named after them. Hawthorne was here for a short time, loved the scenery, loved the quietness, wrote The House of the Seven Gables here. But Lenox was starting to become fashionable. And after a while, Hawthorne said, you know what, this isn't for me. So on his last day in town, on his way out of town, he decided to meet with his friend Herman Melville, another author who lived in the next town of Pittsfield at Arrowhead. And as a going away present, Herman Melville decided to present him with his new book. It was a book about a whale. And that meeting took place at the Wilson Hotel. they met for drinks, and Melville made his goodbye to Hawthorne, and history was made. So Major Wilson was known for his singing. This man is William Otis Curtis. He would be the next owner of the Berkshire Coffee House, and this is where, obviously, we get the name of the Curtis Hotel. He grew up in the town of Stockbridge, in a section that was named after his family, Curtisville. He came to Lenox to run a livery business. Actually, as a 12-year-old, he ran a stagecoach from Hartford to Lenox to help ferry people, and he thought, what a neat business. So he set up in the town of Lenox and met a lot of people that way. Now here's a picture of the Bancroft Hotel in Curtisville. It obviously is a modern picture. There are other pictures of Curtisville that I could have shown you, but you will see further down the line there's a method to my madness.
That's Interlaken.
It is now Interlaken. Very good. Yep. Or Interlaken, depending on who you talk to. And Interlaken is for between two lakes. Sue Coles, who's in the audience, tells me it's because it's between the lakes of Stockbridge and Lake Averitt, as opposed to Interlaken on Old Stockbridge Road near one of the Bishop Estates, which was in between Stockbridge Bowl, Lily Pond, and Laurel Lake. So they've used that name interchangeably. So Curtis buys the hotel. Here is a bill for the newspaper, the New York Herald. It cost $2 for a subscription to Mr. Curtis. It was $3 per annum, so he only bought a partial year. And here is an inset of the map from 1854. Our copy hangs upstairs in the dome room. You can see now we no longer have labeled this Wilson Hotel. We now call it the W.O. Curtis Hotel. You have the courthouse, town hall. There's a building on the corner, and I think that is, again, the jailhouse. Across the street from the courthouse, you see several other buildings with William O. and various Curtises. That would have been where the livery business was located. There was also some cottages. Curtis was an entrepreneur, and he took advantage whenever he could to expand his business, renting other cottages downtown. Curtis loved to tell stories, whether it was stories of the folks he took on the stagecoach ride, or the folks he took through drives through town, or the folks that stayed at the hotel. But his favorite character of all was Fanny Kemble. Now, to me, Fanny Kemble should be more famous than she is. After all, she has a street named after her as well. She was a British actress who came to America in the 1830s, became friends with Catherine Sedgwick of the Stockbridge Sedgwicks, who moved to Lenox to live with her brother Charles Sedgwick, the clerk of courts for the county, who served here. And that is why this is named the Sedgwick Reading Room, because it's named after Charles Sedgwick, who would have been the clerk of courts and the registry of deeds, which is where that new materials area is up the hall. Fanny came to visit Lenox, fell in love with Lenox, would have stayed at the hotel until she finally decided, after her scandalous divorce from Philip Butler, after discovering that he wasn't just from Philadelphia but had a home in Georgia, which was a plantation with slaves, and she was horrified. She and this is how she met William Curtis, coming over on the stagecoach ride. And so Curtis would tell all sorts of stories. He would give her horses for riding. She loved to ride through town. There were scandalous rumors that she rode through town astride and not side saddle like a proper lady. He took her fishing on Stockbridge Bowl and she wore bloomers. But there was one trip where he was describing the scenery and just exchanging pleasantries. And now, I don't have a British accent. I wish Tina Packer were here because she could read this much better. But she said, "William Curtis, I pay you to drive, not to talk about the scenery." So she could be rather uppity that way. So later that week, she received the bill for the drives. And on a particular day, he charged her extra. And she said, "William Curtis, what is this extra bill for?" She always called him William Curtis. He said, "That extra is for the sarce," spelled S-A-R-C-E. I think it was the word sass with a Berkshire accent. He says, "I don't often take sarce, but when I do, I get paid for it." And here's Fanny Kemble's residence. Goodness, why can't I think of that word? The Perch on Kemble Street.
Is that still there?
It's not still there, Rosamond. It was torn down by Cortland Field Bishop as part of the Bishop Estates. There is a marker to mark the property, but he needed room for his carriage house. This picture I know is a little blurry, but it is of William Otis Curtis in the foreground in the rocking chair. In the background, you can see the check-in desk for the Curtis. And this is how I picture him sitting there telling tales of the bygone days of Lenox. And I just want to read a description of him from the Berkshire Gleaner. "Someone should write the life story of William O. Curtis, drayman, poor man, horseman, boarding house keeper, livery man, hotel man, rich man, a fabulous eccentric, full of delicious temper, a character extraordinary, one of the men who set off the 1850 time bomb that smashed the hillside farms of Lenox into pieces and restored the land to the beginning of magnificent estates." So it sums up not only William O. Curtis, but some of the history of Lenox as well. Here is a notice of another auction. This one is 1871, and it is, the language is a little, it's a little more modern, not by much, by virtue of the authority given to the county commissioners by the 4th section of the 17th chapter of the general statutes of this commonwealth. So we've come a long way since 1798. The sale is of the courthouse, jail, warden's house, and other buildings connected therewith. The courts that had been located in Lenox since, as the Shire town since 1787, that location had been challenged year after year by the neighboring now city of Pittsfield. And Pittsfield finally succeeded in having the courts moved from Lenox to Pittsfield. And there was a great fear in Lenox because this is, a lot of the local economy was based on the fact that we had lawyers coming to town, judges coming to town, meeting at the next door tavern and hotel to discuss cases over a nice ale or a glass of wine or rum. Rum was very popular. And the thought of all that business moving to Pittsfield really made folks worry. This auction was held by virtue of that appointment. We shall sell at public auction on Thursday, the 6th day of July next at 11 o'clock in the forenoon at the hotel of William O. Curtis, Esquire. I don't know that William Otis Curtis was ever a lawyer, but he was in this notice. He was an Esquire. So, amazing man. I wish I could have met him. So here's a picture of our brick Curtis. When you're looking at all these pictures often, especially not in this digitized form that we use from the Digital Commonwealth, but our own physical originals that we have in our collection, as well as the Lenox Historical Society, a lot of times there's not any information, identification dates. This is one of those cases. So you start to learn by looking at clues how to date some of these photographs. Because we have the double pillared building, we know it is before 1897, because you can see on the corner of the courthouse that there is nothing there, means that it is before 1889, because this part of the building was not built until then. So you have to picture the original courthouse ending in 1815, where that, probably about that first arch, and then in the 1850s an addition, but this didn't exist until about 40 years later. When the courts moved to Pittsfield, the Schermerhorn family bought the old courthouse at that auction, perhaps, as a assembly hall, and they let the local library use a couple of rooms of the assembly hall, but they used to gather up in the old courtroom, which is what we now call the dome room. And they worried about assemblies being too much for that hall. For instance, Fanny Kemble gave a reading of As You Like It up in the dome room. 450 people came to hear that. It was to benefit the Lenox Library because she wanted to give a benefit for the poor. And she was told that there are no poor in Lenox. So she decided she would give it to the library because the town of Lenox had such eloquent readers. So after that, they started to have second thoughts about using that hall, so they built this one. But that's how you know how old, at least a better idea of how old this picture is. The fellow in the cart is Mr. William O. Curtis with a grandchild, and the couple on the porch would be his son William Derbyshire Curtis and his wife Sylvina, I believe. And here's a picture of William Otis Curtis's son William Derbyshire Curtis. You can imagine if the father was spending all that time spinning yarns, he probably didn't have as much time to run the hotel. So his son would have taken over. And one of the improvements that they made in 1883 is a 3.5-story addition on the back of the old coffee house. You can see it in this picture. Again, this came from the Lenox Historical Society. I think it's a really charming line drawing with all the carriages and horses and making it look like a real hot spot to be. One of the guests of the Curtis during this time period would have been President Chester Arthur. Chester Arthur used the Curtis as his summer White House during his tenure. He laid the cornerstone for Trinity Church. This window is in Trinity Church. It is a Tiffany window, and it's dedicated to Chester Arthur, in 1888, given in memory by his family. Chester Arthur's Secretary of State was Frederick Frelinghuysen. You may recognize this building as the Kemble Inn on the corner of Kemble and Main, across from the Trinity Church. Frelinghuysen was good friends with Chester Arthur, and I believe that is probably what drew Arthur to Lenox. Another picture of the Curtis with, it is interesting how that angles off, and then you have the one in the back. And here's another similar picture, but it gives you more wide angle so you can see the old town hall, the first county courthouse, the building that would house the post office, the Lenox National Bank, across the street from the Curtis. So a real nexus in the middle of town. And here's yet another. Now this one, if you look to the left through the porch, you can now see the Wells Gallery. So this has to be after 1889, but because this two-story porch is front is still there, it has to be before 1897. And one more shot. This one has a date on it. Hallelujah. This is from 1891. This is in the season where we have leaves on all those elm trees. If you've seen old pictures of Lenox, of Main Street, you can only see the trees. Elizabeth Sedgwick, Charles Sedgwick's wife, decided that Lenox needed some beautification. So in the 1850s, where Lenox didn't have any trees at all, if you remember that Barber woodcut, she planted some elm trees, and boy, did they take off like topsy. The Curtis establishment knew that with this new Cottager period, they needed to keep people entertained, so they would do things like hire the Lenox Band to give a concert on the lawn here in front of across the street from the Curtis. And if you can see all the people gathered on not only on the first floor, but if you look, you can also see there's some parasols on the second floor. So the Cottagers changed the dynamic. We were all worried that the courts moving to Pittsfield would be the end of Lenox, and Lenox just changed. The Curtis Hotel would be host to some of our cottagers, either before they opened their cottages for the season or after they closed them, but they were getting ready to go back to New York or to Boston. In this case, the guests of the Curtis were there because their cottage hadn't been built yet. Mr. and Mrs. Gerode Foster stayed at the Curtis with their newly hired architect, Mr. Hastings of Hastings and Carrere. And he was hired to design a model of the Petit Trianon, which is what this is. This is Bellefontaine, which is now Canyon Ranch. The Parsons family were another set of guests. They were on their way to back to New York at the end of the season, having closed up their home, Stoneover. Stoneover was on Yoken Ave, next door to Ethelwyn. We think of Stoneover Farm on Under Mountain Road as being a large estate. That was just the farm. Can you imagine, if that's the farm, what this must have been like to live there?
Their main entrance was on West Street.
Their main entrance to Stoneover,
To Stoneover.
because of all the carriage rides.
Opposite the Morris School.
Mm,
There's a little house next to the stream.
yes.
There's a long alleyway.
So I don't know if you could hear Chiaja. The main drive was on West Street at the foot of the hill opposite Morris. If you're heading towards Tanglewood and you go to the foot of the hill, there's that little white house and there's a drive.
Yeah,
So
I always wondered about that.
if you look at some of these old atlases, which we have upstairs in our special collections, the sizes of these properties. I mean, can you picture from Yokin across Parsons Marsh, which was not a marsh at the time? No beavers, right. Across Under Mountain to the farm.
Is that still there?
That is not still there.
Looks like
Marcy Brown's house was built on the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the foundation still shows, because it's like the veranda or the outside porch.
Parsons' daughters remodeled it, and then that part was torn down. Is that right, Chet?
That I don't know. I
Mm.
know that a piece of that house
Mm.
is on Under Mountain Road.
Okay. See, we move houses. We keep moving houses. A piece of this house is on Under Mountain Road.
After you go the 90-degree curve, about halfway down between the 90-degree
The 90-degree curve and
Stoneover,
Stoneover to the right.
is a funny kind of weird shaped house, and it is a chunk of that house.
Oh my, that is.
Oh, chateau.
See, we're going to talk about stories of the Curtis, but we can talk about all sorts of stories. This is why I'm glad we've gathered today. This is wonderful. John Parsons died in 1915. Before he died, he made it clear that there would be no bequests coming from him because he did not like posthumous generosity. But he did give to charity and to causes in his lifetime. One of those causes was to the Lenox Library Association, so his portrait hangs in the hall. Another organization was the Fresh Air Fund. He bought the Bancroft Hotel in Curtisville and hosted children from New York City to come up for the summer to get away from the tenements. He named this hotel St. Helen's Home. This is named after his daughter Helen, who tragically died as a young woman of typhoid fever. St. Helena's Church is also named after her. And once again, I thank Sue Coles for help with Curtisville. She's a Stockbridge historian. Here's a picture of the dining room in the Curtis. I'm not sure that this is where the current dining room would have been. This may be from the previous building, but it was known for its excellence of table. And here's a brochure that Patty Milne has lent to us, and I highlight this page because I love the little quote on the top right corner. All the choicest products of the Pinnacle Farm, owned by the proprietor of the hotel, are brought fresh from the gathering, and to these are added the delicacies of city living. So this is from the 1894 Atlas of Lenox, Lee, and Stockbridge. And I'm going to zoom in on what is now Hubbard Street. And here is W.O. Curtis. This would have been the location of Pinnacle Farm. I'd like to, It's okay. That's the reaction I thought I'd have from Urani. It's Ronnie's Osterhouse. So this location used to have a sawmill on it, and when Curtis bought the property, people thought he was crazy because, again, it was a swamp, and he turned it into a 70-acre farm. Pinnacle Farm provided vegetables, dairy, eggs, poultry, pork, apples, peaches and plums, 100-pound squashes, and all the flowers for the hotel. It's named Pinnacle Farm because there is a elevation called the Pinnacle, which had beautiful views from what I hear from Jan Shaggy, one of our Lenox historians, so I appreciate that tip.
Lots of babies.
Now, here's a picture, let's get back to, of William D. Curtis with, I believe, are his daughter Laura and his son Otis. And in the background you can see a greenhouse, so I believe this is Pinnacle Farm. Another picture, also unmarked, are 3 young men of color. Lenox, that's a little unusual. So, but as Ronnie Fenton just mentioned, one of the neighbors was a family by the name of Osterhout. And if you were looking at their next door neighbor, that would have been their cousins, the Vanderzees. So because this is not labeled, I don't know if these are the Vanderzee brothers. But here's a picture of the Vanderzee brothers. So I'm going to take a guess and say that it is. But boy, it would be sure nice to know for sure.
It does look like it.
Here's another picture with William Curtis the son with 2 other adults and 2 dogs near the entrance to the Curtis. Here's another one with 3 children, 1 a baby in a sweet little baby carriage. So I'm going to go on a little rant. I have a banker's box about this big. There are hundreds of pictures like this in the box. There are maybe 2 pictures in the whole box that have been labeled. One of them is labeled with the year, the young man's height and weight, and no name. So do your family a favor. If you have old pictures and you know who these folks are now, please label them, because eventually there won't be anybody around to remember. So.
Yeah.
And herein ends the rant. Now the Curtis was about to get some competition in 1897, October 13th. There's a Valley Gleaner article that mentions that there are New York parties who are looking for a hotel spot, and they're looking at the Woolsey property. And this is the hotel that they would eventually build in 1902. This is the Aspinwall Hotel. So if you know where Kennedy Park is and there's that overlook, that's about the area where Aspinwall would be. Now this is going to look familiar to Giaja. This is Home Farm. This is on Under Mountain Road. And this is a photograph taken by Edwin Hale Lincoln. Remember Edwin Hale Lincoln? Does it seem like a while ago? So you have the golf course from the Lenox Club. You have Belvoir Terrace. I think that's Deep Dean. I'm not sure. But the thing that I want you to see, although it's a wonderful picture of Home Farm, look at the size of the Aspinwall Hotel. I mean, that just dominated the whole landscape I can imagine. Built in 1902, was built to be fireproof. That's ironic. It was built to be fireproof from the inside. However, the story is that there was a couple spooning in their car and dropped a cigarette outside, and spectacular fire. The fire, 1931. That's what I thought. Thank you for verifying that. I'm a librarian, so I feel like, wait, let me look that up for sure. So 2 weeks after that Valley Gleaner article, Curtis decides, I better step up my game. So 2 weeks later, there's an article in the same paper saying Curtis has hired James Clifford's sons to make a new addition to his hotel. I hope this going in and out isn't making people dizzy, but I love being able to zoom in on details like, I think that might be Albert Clifford, I'm not sure. His descendants still live in town. Butchie Clifford, who owns Lenox Clifford Oil, Danny Clifford, the retired chief of the fire department, known for their building all sorts of cottages and other buildings, including Stoneover. Now, this picture in our collection was mislabeled. On the back, someone had written Ashentully and then crossed it out. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Ashentully. That is an estate in Tyringham with ginormous columns in the front, which is all that remain. So clearly not Ashentully, and somebody recognized that, but they wrote Ananda Hall. Ananda Hall was the estate of Cortlandt Bishop. We were talking about the perch earlier. Cortlandt Bishop tore down the perch. He also tore down some other things to build Ananda Hall in 1920. And it's described as a wood clapboard building. Now, we don't have a lot of pictures of Ananda Hall. And in fact, in one of our local publications, this photograph was used to illustrate the tearing down of Ananda Hall in the 1930s. And I looked at this picture, and I don't know if you can see evidence of split lath. That is older than 1920. The wallpaper alone is older looking than 1920. But it wasn't until we sent our pictures to Digital Commonwealth and we were able to mass all the pictures we had on the Curtis Hotel that I was able to kind of put pieces together and say, wait a minute, this is the Curtis Hotel. So we know this picture is the Curtis Hotel, and it's from 1897, which is when the addition was made. And here's a picture of Cortlandt Bishop with his two dogs in front of Ananda Hall, so you can see for sure that building previously was not Ananda Hall. All right, so here's how the new addition turned out. Enlarge the footprint. It's pretty much the current building now. Extends almost to the library line. Always pictures of people strolling up. It's unusual in that some of the Cottager pictures, there aren't people in them. There's always people in these pictures of the Curtis. There's a lady taking a lovely stroll out front. Postcards of the Curtis were popular as well. This is from our collection. It's from, let's see. Goodness, what are we up to? 1904, yes. Another postcard. This is from Tom Fiorini. There are two kids in the foreground. I don't know if mom told them to go play in traffic. And here's another shot of the Curtis, the new Curtis. There's, you can see the balconies. The awnings are drawn in at this point. The black shutters, very elegant. The Curtis continued to host events at the hotel. This is a banquet given by the town of Lenox in honor of the boys who served in the World War. We have a copy of this menu that's signed by 200 of those soldiers. And this is another copy, and that's what the cover looks like. But the consomme in cups, baked salmon with butter sauce. We've got broiled sirloin steak, so they serve surf and turf. I'm not sure what chicken salad mayonnaise is. And we ended with coffee, cigars, and cigarettes.
Well, salad was a last course, not a first course. So that was probably the salad course.
Oh, that was a salad course.
That's true in a lot of places still.
Mm.
It's supposed to cleanse your palate.
To
Although I
cleanse
don't
your
think
palate?
the chicken salad would cleanse your
I
palate.
don't know that mayonnaise would cleanse anyone's palate. is a picture of Clinton Jones. Clinton Jones married young Laura. Remember young Laura from the earlier picture with her brother and dad on the farm? They would buy the Walker House. Remember the Walker House? And expand it to provide more overflow for the guests. Now here's a picture from the Lenox Historical Society. I believe this is from Ed Cahalan's notebooks on Lennoxdale, of the Lennoxdale, Mass. Original Al Smith for President Club. 1923, they're in Albany, New York. Now why would I show a picture of the Al Smith Club from Lennoxdale and a program on the Curtis? Thanks for asking. There was a rally held in 1928 on the steps of the Curtis by the governor of New York, a fellow by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So another president in our midst. He wasn't president yet, but he would be. And here's a cover of a brochure, again lent by Patty Milne of the Curtis Hotel. This is a little later in the 20s. You can see kind of the flapper dress going on, and one of the ladies, if you notice, is holding a set of golf clubs. This brochure happens to have more material on the new Berkshire Hunt Club, which had golf links. That club, at one point, stretched from the Pinecroft estate of Skirmahorn on Walker Street, down through his farm, which is now Kemble Farms, over to Coldbrook and Windhurst, which is now the Cranwell estate, and Blantyre. So now there's no bypass yet. So can you imagine one property that large? That's how big this club was. And Curtis decided it would be good to, or his descendants would decide it would be good to highlight other activities in town, because at this time, guests were no longer staying for the whole season. They used to come and stay for the entire summer. With the advent of the automobile, it was easier for people to make day trips or weekend trips. So they had to adjust. Again, they were good at that. Here's a picture from a brochure called Welcome to Lenox, What to Do, Where to Go, What to See During Festival Week. Festival Week refers to the Berkshire Symphonic Festival. This is from 1936. Berkshire Symphonic Festival is a precursor to the Tanglewood, our Tanglewood gathering. It was only, originally I believe it was only 3 concerts, and then it expanded to a week. Lester Roberts, the manager of the Curtis, saw opportunity to get on board with something that he thought would be a going concern. So here's a map on the back of the brochure, and there are venues highlighted. Homewood, the site of the festival, which is the Fox Hollow estate, before it moved to the Dixie property, which is now Tanglewood. Pleasant Valley Bird and Wildflower Sanctuary, Wheatley, where they had sunset religious services. Shadowbrook, the Jesuit novitiate, the location of Hawthorne's Cottage, and the Berkshire's Hunt and Country Club. But none of them are so prominently listed as the Curtis Hotel in the center of town, using even a different font. We mentioned FDR before. We now have his wife featured in 1939. Now this is Europe has begun World War II, and the U.S. is desperately trying to stay out. So she was asked to speak at the town hall, and also gave a reception at the Curtis Hotel. Hundreds attended. the menu for this reception included roast Berkshire turkey with New England dressing. And we didn't have the cigars and cigarettes this time either. But she was asked on her opinion on neutrality, which was a big question then. And she advised listeners to read more than one newspaper to avoid confusion over what is going on in the world. Be sure to see the different views expressed in the various newspapers, weigh the points, and then decide with which you agree. Wow, that's good advice, don't you think? Here's another card from Tom Fiori's collection. We have the old stage grill and bar prominently displayed, and we have the old stagecoach. That stagecoach was ridden by Chester Arthur, and when it was time to retire the coach, they didn't put it out to pasture, they just put it out to the Curtis yard. Other presidents besides FDR and Arthur stayed at the Curtis either before, during, or after their presidency. That includes Martin Van Buren, Millard Fillmore, Teddy Roosevelt, and John Fitzgerald Kennedy. When he was running for Senate, his mother and sisters had a tea, and the young JFK charmed all the women. He was really after the women's vote, according to the newspaper. And here's a menu card cover for the old stage grill and bar. It looks like somebody may have had either coffee, maybe scotch, not sure. There's a list of all the beverages in there, which is ironic because at one point Lenox was considered a dry town, and Curtis didn't serve alcohol, but they did by then. I understand there's some stories coming that talk about the fact that alcohol was freely consumed. But I also like the fact that Mr. Duncan Hines, the publisher of Adventures in Good Living, I thought Duncan Hines was just a cake mix company, but I guess we now know where that came from.
Amy, when was this?
I'm not sure.
Like, when was the stage grill and bar there in the hotel?
I'm thinking the 40s, 50s, 60s. I'm hoping some of our attendees can pinpoint that because there's no date on this.
In that photograph where the wagon was there, that looked to be exactly where the phone booths were.
Oh, okay.
My use, so
Ah,
it would,
phone
so
booths.
I go back to 1956, and
Okay.
it wasn't there then.
Okay, so maybe more like the 40s. We'll see. Maybe right after Prohibition, because they needed to make up for lost time.
The suit on the
His
man
clothing.
postcard was.
Well, that's a stylized, old-fashioned
But
look.
the other one, the one that was right before it, we could maybe tell them that.
Well, let's see.
See that suit?
That seems more 40s to me,
Late
no?
40s.
Yeah.
And the hat.
Girl with the
No,
red
not
arrow.
40s,
Oh, that-
wrong
Isn't
shoulders.
she? Yeah.
The clothing had pointier shoulders.
In the 40s?
About 30,
Yeah,
30s.
Yes.
So maybe early 50s?
Yeah, I would say 50s.
Well, no, just around 1940.
All right, we are almost finished, so let me keep going because I want to get to your stories. Lenox Bicentennial Ball in 1967, one of our photographs from Louis Lamone. I think I see, let's see. I believe that is Janet Levesque, which would make the guy losing his wig her husband Pierre. And the Bisakas. I'm sure there are other folks that you can recognize in this picture, but this was held, in fact, I think that's Cap Conklin right there, but held in the ballroom of the Curtis. And here is Canon Robert S.S. Whitman. There are
I remember.
all sorts of people that I could have chosen to illustrate who attended this ball. I chose Canon Whitman because later on, he and his wife would purchase Pinnacle Farm. Remember Pinnacle Farm? And I'd like to end with this picture. Tom has some dowsing rods in his apartment over at the Curtis. Tom, I think this might be your ghost. It looks like a ghost wandering down the hall. Perhaps it's the ghost of Daniel Williams. We'll never know. Thank you very much for coming.